welcome everyone who is joining us for the first time and who has been with the beginning. We have made it to episode number 39, and a merch has been brought up to our attention on several accounts. So we're excited to break the wall down on all things merch. And we've got some great special guests today, and we've got Shelly back with us, and Adrian's going to get it kicked off to introduce our special guests. And if you have not changed your chat settings, please do to all participants and attendees, just so that way we can see the conversation and address questions and so on and so forth. So yeah, I know let's get this thing kicked off. I'll pass it over to Adrian, and we'll get our special guests introduced and rolling here.
Thank you, Mark. Good morning, everyone. Again, we're really stoked to have Angel Warbe and Aaron Mason with us. Both of them super pros in the merchandising area. To be clear, merchandising is artist branded, anything that you can think of. Generally, you're talking what we call cloth items, which are t-shirts and hoodies. You got your trinkets, your wristbands, your hats. We'll get, anything now. We're going to talk about probably face masks. We've had bandanas. There are cups. There are wallets. There are anything you can brand falls under merch. Merch has long been the underdog, but as we become a more astute business practice, it is important to understand that merchandising is your ancillary income on a tour. Aside from the cost of merch, everything else goes to the artist. Whereas once you get your guarantees, you're paying out for production, staffing, and everything else. So you need that merch money. Also, your merch people are important members of your team, because every single one of those items is a t-shirt, is a stack of $20 bills. So you want someone astute in that position who's managing those ancillary dollars, keeping a hold of that cash, and also, importantly, being the first thrust out in the lobby. That's kind of your welcome card. So I look forward to introducing you guys to Angel and to Aaron, and we're going to go to Aaron Mason. So Aaron, welcome. Thank you for joining us. We're so stoked to have you. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the Reader's Digest version of how you got into the merchandising business?
Well, I started off early in my career. I was interning for a record label. At that time, I had met my now husband, who was in a band, and kind of a cliche start, but it was a good fit. He asked if I would go on tour with them and do their merch. So we did that for about 3 or 4 years or so. And we were in a van with a trailer. I maybe made $100 a week, and we were lucky to get towels and water. I often joke now, but it also is some of the best times I had touring, if I look back at it that way. That evolved into bigger tours and referrals. We were on tour in Europe with his band, and his EU booking agent had referred me to Anthill Trading, which was a bigger merch company. And so I got on board with them, and I started off with Blondie, who I still work with to this day. And Anthill evolved into other companies, which is now Easy Partners, one of them, who I currently work with. And from that, I've also had other jobs come into play. So when I was with Blondie, I would fill in doing production assistant work because there was a need for it. And when you're in that role, you kind of want to do anything you can. So I ended up working for them a couple years doing that. And that led me to meeting a talent agent that's close to my area, who offered me a job as a production manager for a venue. So I was with them for about 6 years. They took that position in-house. I still handle their merchandise when we have that. And from that job, I was referred to another venue locally. I'm in the Phoenix area, and that's at Mesa Amphitheater. So just before everything really went into a shutdown mode, I had been working with them on their in-house book shows for about a year and a half.
Okay. And you, with Easy Partners are sort of a in-house merch manager. Yeah.
Also, yes,
Yep.
I work with them. I work directly with the owner, Kathy Cleghorn,
Hmm.
and I am an admin assistant. So I work with her full time year round. I keep an office near my home in Phoenix, and I uh, handle in between merch stock. And I work directly with one of our main um, fulfillment partners. They house, I think, 8 of our online stores, and they're local to me. So it's really a good relationship for me to go back and forth with them. And
Cool.
that's Hello Merch, which we love them too.
Amazing. And I also just want to note for those watching that Erin is a touring mom.
Oh, yeah.
She is a mom who tours, proving that moms can also tour. There is a way to do that for those of you who are interested in knowing that bit of information. And over to my friend Angel Warbay. Hi, Angel, Cat Daddy
Hi.
of Brooklyn.
So kind of like Aaron, basically, I was also working at a record label. And at the time, one of the bands that were on the label, one of the members became my roommate for a while. And at a certain point where record sales were tanking back in 2006 or so, they offered, or he offered, to bring me on the road, mainly as a sober buddy for him because he was dealing with that, and also their tour manager needed an assistant. And so basically I decided to stop working at a record label and go on tour, and I did that for a couple years. Then the tour manager decided to keep me working with him, and he took me on a tour doing merch, which I had never done before. And that was 12 years ago of doing merch, and pretty much haven't looked back except for a brief year or so tour managing, which I didn't enjoy. So.
Amazing. Amazing. So then can we talk about, so you went from sort of this weird touring position, and can you talk about who that was that you first did merch for and why it kind of stayed with you? Why being in merch, you know, why it became your jam, who that first artist was, and why did merch become your jam?
I don't really know why I took to it so much or so well, but the first tour that I did doing merch was a Henry Rollins tour in 2007, and that's obviously small clubs and little theaters, stuff like that, and it was basically it was kind of the perfect learning merch tour because it was a small product line. He didn't sell a ton of stuff, and it wasn't overly complicated. And the previous band that I had worked with, that tour manager, was a bigger band, and I had basically observed. Occasionally I would go behind the merch table and help out their merch guy if it was very busy. So I kind of got the idea of what it's like to vend and see how he dealt with money, and watch him do settlements and whatnot. And that's kind of just how I picked it up. And having come from the record label background as well, I was pretty experienced in dealing with spreadsheets and budgets and things like that. So it just kind of came together.
Right. And one thing we know about Angel is that Angel is pleased that he works with cotton now because t-shirts don't talk back.
T-shirts don't talk back. I'm not, when I tour managed for a year thinking that that's what I wanted to do, I quickly realized that I was not a very accommodating person for adults that request things like children. So I went back to doing merch, and that's been it for me.
The adult babysitting portion of tour management didn't register with Angel.
Yeah,
so.
because previously I was babysitting one guy in a band for the most part, and we were friends. So it wasn't the same as when I went to then having 6 guys in a band that were pretty incorrigible, on top of a crew that I'll say kind of sucked as well.
Sweet.
So So yeah, I quickly learned it wasn't really for me. Probably
Sweet.
why I don't have kids either.
So to everybody in the room, before I toss it over to Jim, so we have a lot of really important stuff to cover. So we're going to move it along quickly today. But wanted to mention to everyone in the room, the reason that we're so excited to have both Angel and Aaron with us today is both of them have gone from really basic indie artists, Aaron in a van and a trailer, Angel with Henry Rollins in a very small product line, all the way to Michelle Obama's book tour or Shawn Mendes in stadiums. And conversely, Aaron, starting out in a van and trailer, ends up with Blondie and with, the Neil Young, and doing some really epic stuff on the fly. Welcome, Kathy Cleghorn is in the room from Easy Partners. Welcome. Nice to see you, Kathy. Thank you for joining us. So I'm going to toss this over to Jim Runge, and we're going to really break it down as best we can in the next hour and 15. Over to you, Jim.
So Aaron, let's start with you. How is a merch line developed for a tour? What do you usually do to go about getting that set up before the tour starts?
Well, every artist is unique. You have a primary decision maker, or it's management, or it's somebody from the band. I'll use Blondie as an example because I've been working with them for the longest. So I would say you have Debbie is kind of your primary go-to is for approvals, and together with her input, and if she might have an idea and we have ideas, or we know what has worked in the past, we work together to build the line. We'll have a graphics person do mock-ups of some ideas, and then we'll go back and forth. It's usually will happen a few times, a few tweaks or changes until everybody's happy and we get to the ideal line.
And once you have that design approved, and how do you decide which printers to use on that, and where to go to have that those shirts made?
Right. Well, usually you want to have printers all over. We have printers on the East Coast, on the West Coast, in the middle of the country. But we have relationships with people that we work with a lot. So we tend to kind of, like to use the same printers. And it may depend on where your tour starts or ends, that you might want to think about where you're going to use. You may end up using both of them during the tour if you need to, or you may stick with one because you already have everything set up ready to reprint. So it just really depends on the artist and the tour.
And one of the things you talked about yesterday that we all thought was interesting, and using Blondie as an example of what the artist wants for merch and what you know as the merchandiser and the fans want, and how you kind of reconcile that with the artist.
Well, you try and find the middle ground. So as myself, somebody who's on the front line and who's directly selling a lot of times to the fans, I would say a lot of times they want the vintage look, or they want the classic look. But you also have the artist who maybe wants to see something different. They want the whole band and not just themselves. So, we have to find middle ground to where everybody's happy. And, we also want to make the fans happy, but it's the artist and it's their creativity. So at the end of the day, you're going to do what your client wants.
I just thought that was so great. We all want Debbie Harry's face on our shirts this big, and she's probably like, enough of that. Let me do something interesting. It's such an interesting concept to work with an artist on how they think their brand is meant to look for the fans.
For sure.
Right.
Angel, how does the tour decide on how many designs you use and what types of items that you put up for sale?
That tends to come. I'm for the most part strictly a road guy. I'm luckily I've worked with some artists long enough that I will have some input. But it seems to be more and more these days. It's management. Some artists are hands-on, some aren't. Some just kind of wait for things to be presented to them and they say yay or nay. But yeah, it seems to be it's mainly, I feel, management. with occasionally management or merch companies. And, like yesterday I was mentioning, it seems in the last couple of years or so, it's becoming it's almost an arms race of who can have the most amount of stuff, which, I myself and most road people, I feel, would argue that less is more, because some bands that aren't KISS apparently want to be KISS and want to have 20, 25 different shirts up on a wall. And ultimately, the amount of money that they're making generally is, if anything, affected negatively, I feel, as people walk up to merch stands and are confused by what they see and what they want. But yeah, for the most part, it can be anywhere from a manager could be making ultimately all the decisions. Sometimes it's just a merch company putting together things to show the manager, artists, etc. And like I said, occasionally the lowly road guy like me gets to have his say.
And what do you feel is the ideal amount of designs for a tour?
For an arena tour, if you're playing arena stadiums, personally, 14 to 15 cloth items, I think is perfect. I feel like you can hit kind of every spot. You can have the kind of typical tour shirt with, the artist photo or the album on the front and the tour dates on the back. You can have a few weird kind of custom items. You can have the hoodies or high-end jackets, things like that. For a club tour, 8, I would say, is probably ideal at the high end. Yeah, it kind of varies also on who your customer is. If you've got a customer that buys 3 or 4 T-shirts, you obviously want to give them a wider selection. If you do lower per heads, then maybe you don't need 8 items. If people generally buy one thing, then yeah.
Angel, how does space factor in when you're developing a merch line, like trailer space or space of the venue to vend? What kind of factor does that bring into it?
It's a huge factor. I mean, truck space, trailer space I feel is always an issue. Even when I have a full semi just for merch, I feel like I'm always struggling to find space for things. But when it comes to venues, yeah, obviously it varies building to building, but some places have a huge space where they can display 20 shirts and it looks awesome. Some places you can come in there with 8 or 10 and it looks terrible, and they don't have room for not only a display, but for the product itself. That's a huge issue. So again, less is more.
So Aaron, I have a question for you. Aaron just went off.
I think we just lost Aaron.
I think we might have. We might be rebooting for a second.
Oh man.
I bet Angel might be able to answer this.
Yeah, Angel. So now that you have your merch line, how does a merch company estimate how much merchandise is needed for the tour, and what factors need to be considered when deciding how much to order?
This is actually probably a better question for Erin, since she does that from more of the merch company. But I mean, basically, it's math. You look at what your ticket counts are, what your expected ticket sales are for your upcoming tour, and then hopefully,
Erin is rebooting. She'll be right back. Just
Okay.
got a note from her, so she's going to come back and answer the complicated numbers question.
Yeah, but it was basically hopefully if you have an artist that has a merch history, you do have an idea. I keep before we explained it, I'll keep using the term per head, but you have an idea of what kind of dollar numbers an artist typically does, and you have your ticket count, your projected dollar numbers. You look at your merch line and what you kind of guesstimate what you think will be your top selling item, and hope you're right. And then you split off what you think is going to sell percentage wise and decide what you want to print. At least as Aaron will explain, you don't print everything up front, obviously, because as many of us have done, I generally will look at a merch line and will always think the coolest shirt will be the worst. It ends up being the worst selling one because I'm not the typical fan of the artist. So, yeah. So it's a little bit of a guessing game and a little bit of a science.
And when you're considering the factors of when you're ordering that, so I know something we had talked about yesterday is discussing with tour managers and production managers on thinking about space that's needed in the truck for merch. When you're starting out, what kind of conversations are you having with management to discuss the space needed, and so you have that idea in your head of what you need each week that you're going through the tour?
Yeah, I mean it's hard to get unless you have a full semi truck, and then I know what I'm dealing with. When you're on a tour and you talk to a production manager or a tour manager and discuss how much space they think they can allot to you, which I would say easily 90% of the time that space ends up getting cut on the first day. Then you kind of figure out what you can have, space, as experienced merch guy, you kind of, if they tell you you have 3 feet, you have 6 feet, you have 10 feet, you kind of know how many boxes that equates to. And then you also know how many t-shirts go in a box. And then you kind of try to ship accordingly so that, you're not putting a 2-pound ham in a 1-pound bag.
I like that. Can you explain to us, as long as we're talking about it, we might as well talk about what is per head?
Per head which is the number a lot of people kind of live and die by, from the road guy to the artist, is what your gross amount at a show that you sell divided by the amount of people at the show. So for instance, if you sell $100,000 worth of merch and you had 10,000 people at the show, then you did $10 per head, as in the amount of people there, every person there spent an average of $10 on merch.
And that would be pretty good.
$10 is not a number to sneeze at.
Erin, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Sorry about that.
No, it's all right. Welcome back. So the question that we just spoke with Angel about that we wanted to ask you as well was, you now have your merch line that you've developed. How does a merch company estimate how much merchandise is needed for the tour? And just going in from your experiences, what factors have you had to experience when deciding how much merch to order?
Well, you do a projection, and I think Angel was touching on that when I got back on. So sorry if I repeat, but it's better to know it fully than not at all. You take the capacities of all the venues of the tour, and then you multiply that by your per head. And by that, you have your product line. So you take your product line and you say, according to these shirts, we estimate the tour shirt's going to do the most, probably. And then, maybe that's 40%, and you do it percentage-wise down the line. And then you build that into the number that you have. So it's a lot of math, but it's a science. Math is a science. So, you can get solid numbers and you're not just guessing. And then you take each design, and according to what you've sold in the past, according to sizes, you can split it up between small to extra larges and do, 10, 20, 30% according to size that have sold in the past.
And can you for everyone that's listening, can you define what a drop ship means?
That is where you plan to ship your merch during the tour. Sometimes you may have a one-off and you're just dropping into that date. Sometimes it's a restock because you have to take into account how much space you're going to have. So that's when you're working directly with your production managers or your tour managers. Sometimes the tour manager is the production manager. So they will allocate you, usually they will allocate you an amount of space on the smaller tours. On the much larger tours, they may have their own truck. In a lot of cases, you're going to be sharing with production. So they may put you in the front of the truck to where you can keep your stock organized, and you may not have that much space because they're carrying a lot of production. And so you can only carry maybe a few shows worth of stuff, and you have to plan to drop ship along the way. So when we do our advance, we'll always want to make sure that we know what the best plan for that is at each venue. Because also sometimes you have unexpected sales and you need to reorder on the fly. So in that case, you also need to do a drop ship in to restock.
How do you, Erin, how do you estimate, you know, you've given us the formula for what you think a tour is going to do from the outset. But when you actually do your first run, you don't order everything you think right up front for the entire tour. How do you kind of figure out what you're going to get for your first shipment? How do you,
Correct.
you know, how do you sort of anticipate?
Well, a lot of that will also go with what space you have, because with shipping, you want to ship as much as you can, but it, you know, it depends on what you have. So also, you don't know exactly if those designs are going to sell according to how you've estimated it. So you want to give it, I'd say, about 3 shows in to know what your trends are. So when you start off, you'll do your full projection to get your numbers, to know about how much you want to make. You may order the blanks in advance, but you may only print about 30% of that just to see how it's going to go for the first few shows. So as merch people, every night, it's very important that we get our numbers in immediately. I have an unspoken deadline of, or maybe spoken deadline of 12 p.m. by the next day at the latest. Ideally, you want your numbers to go to everybody that night, but a lot of times it's hectic and you're getting out very late. You're the last one. You want to go over your numbers so you're not sending misinformation. So to have a second set of eyes on it, maybe after a good sleep, is always good. But it's very important, especially those first few shows, that your information gets to, you know, ground control, as I like to call it, you know, right away, because they're the ones that are looking at it and going to be calling the printers and saying, this is what we need to do.
Got it. I had one quick question. Because I've seen you guys, I've seen you and Kathy Cleghorn roll with some last minute. What happens when an artist gets an idea for a show specific, let's say one of your shows on your run has some great significance to the act, and they suddenly want to add an item that is particularly for this day? What does that look like for you guys? When X artist says, I need a bandana and this, that, and the other thing, and we got a show next week, and I really want these bandanas on the merch stand for this show. What happens?
Well, sometimes you need to make it happen because that's the client. And sometimes you may suggest against it because it's going to cannibalize the rest of the items, which I love that term for some reason. So you know, it just depends individually what happens. If you have to do it and that's the case, then you call your printer and call in favors and you do it really quickly. And you make magic happen. I know firsthand that my boss has made so much magic happen for several clients because they don't get the reality of it maybe. And a lot of people say yes to them all the time. So you have to, you know, do your best. And sometimes it's not realistic and it's not maybe what's best, but if that's what the client wants, that's what you do. They're the boss.
Got it. All right, over to MJ.
So we're going to talk about venue merch deals. And the venue merch deal is, it varies by event, but it's worked out by the agent, the promoter, when the deal is done. But and it's split between the venue and the tour. So after you have your sales, the venue takes a certain cut, and when you're settling up, and it varies by the event, but typically it's anywhere between 70 and 80% and 30 and 20% to the event and 70 to 80% to the artist. And then on cloth, and then on other media, it can be like 90-10, sometimes it's 100%. And I will show you a deal memo. You'll find this on your deal memo. And so here is, let me get one open. I have a couple actually. All right. So this is, bear with me here. Okay. Let me screen share. Okay. So can you guys see that?
Yes.
Okay. So this was a club. I found some like old, really old club deals. This is a club deal that you might, you actually, I won't tell you what venue it's from, but you will see this on an early tour that you do. You merch people probably know what this is. You might. So down here, there's a terms of merch, 80-20 soft, 90-10 hard, and the venue sells. So they provide somebody to sell. And then you might see something like, oops, this, which on this particular show, it's also another club, it's 80-15 soft. So 85% goes to the artist and 15% has to get paid to the venue, but they retain 100% of hard, which would be DVDs, CDs, and this the artist sells. So that's what a deal, that's where you'll find your deal as a tour manager. And you would want to communicate this to your merch person if you're carrying a merch person. So what I usually do is make a spreadsheet and I just go through my deal memos and I just send it to the merch person along with the merch contacts. But Erin, I want to ask, do you guys ever have to negotiate this on the fly? Like, does it ever change? Because we've talked about in earlier episodes that, sometimes you get this deal memo and things can change.
Right. It is, you always have to advance and confirm everything because venues will have like a standard house deal that they typically do. But in some cases, it is negotiated differently than what their standard rate is. So an example I will use is a YouTuber that I worked with who really fought for her merch deal because she was very passionate that she got a certain percentage. So as a sweetheart deal, as I like to call it, she got 90-10 across the board on everything, which is really unheard of. And so when I was advancing, not all of the venue merch people that had necessarily trickled down to. So in all my emails, I would go and reconfirm because I knew that was going to be an issue. I would say more than half, probably 80%, we'd have to go back and forth. I'll need to check on this. And even down to the day, because I would keep notes, I would know who hadn't confirmed with me yet. And so before we even are going to start the show, I want to make sure that we're on the same page because it's not something that you want to deal with at the end of the night.
Do you want to show us an example of your advance?
Well, this is for, I pulled up an email that I was using for Blondie and let me just do my share screen here. And I have not honestly done a lot of share screens, so.
If you can't get it to work, I can pop it up for you.
Oh, okay.
You want me to do that? Oh, you got it?
Yay.
Yep.
Okay. So I can just go through this. So I just copied this into a Word document so you could see. In my subject line, I always do an individual email. So I want to know when they reply because I'll send out 20 to 30 at once. I want to know the city and state and date for everything. So some basic questions. I'm at the point where now when I send this out, I like to give them as much information as possible. So they're going to get a count sheet. which is basically all the items and the sizes. It's what I use when I get into the venue to fill out what I'm giving to them, and so that we can look at it. I like to have a physical. So many times, and in this call is a great example, your computer can malfunction. So I like to have everything written down by hand. I'll send them pictures of the product with prices so that they can use it. They have all the information in advance, and banking instructions and W-9s. So this one was for our Blondie and Elvis Costello co-headliner. We had 3 settlements for this one, and we had the Blondie line, Elvis Costello line, and an event line, which has both products put together on one shirt. And so Easy Partners settlement was going to Blondie and Event, and Wonderful Union was Elvis Costello, and I was handling all 3 for that tour. So what time do you check in? I like to 3 or 4 hours at least. You know, what do they have for their merch area? Confirm the tax, who retains, because sometimes the venue wants to retain the tax and sometimes they want you to retain it. The drop ship question again, because I always want to know, just in case, you never know if you're going to have to ship something. Who is going to do the settlement, because maybe the person that I'm talking to in the advance isn't going to be the person that's there that day. So who am I looking to pay or get paid from? Current ticket count is important, because while it may be a 2,000 cap venue, there's only 1,000 tickets sold. So I will bring in a different amount of merch depending on how many actual tickets have been sold. What time are doors? And so many times I've learned this the hard way. Is the merch area in a lobby that the public has access to before doors? Because that is never noted backstage in your day sheet. You have to talk to the venue people about that. So that's just a basic.
Yeah, I do want to mention that it is really, really good in your advance, particularly in theaters. We see this a lot, but the doors, maybe doors to the concourse, are not the same time as doors to the house. So you got to know if your concourse is going to open earlier than doors. That way your merch folks know that if doors to the concourse happen 45 minutes before doors to the bowl, arena, or actual theater, your merch folks need to know that they're going to have a little bit of an earlier onslaught than everybody else.
And sometimes this even happens in clubs too. Yeah. Like if a club is sort of set up like a theater and it has like a lobby, but then there's the doors that go into the club. Like, so as a tour manager, that's definitely important to note to everybody really, but especially merch.
I feel like you're starting to see a lot of VIP fluctuations in there as well, which is important because sometimes those VIPs are going to happen
early merch
immediately after sound check or earlier in the day before doors, and then that's a completely different variable you're adding to your merch for that day. So
correct. And the ability to shop early at merch is a huge selling point. Non-artist integrated perk for the VIP program. The no line merch experience is a huge seller. So your relationship with your merch person, TM to merch person in that regard is important as well. Don't let them, make sure that they know that's going to happen. They generally will be in on that conversation from the beginning. But again, sometimes things fall through the cracks and we think that there's information flowing a certain way and it's not. So you want to just touch in with your people and make sure that they're aware if there is early merch that they're a part of that.
And Angel, can you talk to us about, I thought this was really interesting because I haven't actually experienced this even on arena tours. But you told us yesterday about how sometimes you can't necessarily advance confirm what the deal is in advance. And can you explain to us how that sometimes can work?
Yeah, very much like Aaron's advanced email. When I was looking at it, looks almost identical to what I send and what I try to, the information that I try to get. And yeah, it's just certain buildings and the people that you deal with, you can, on that email, you ask, this is the deal I have, can you please confirm? And they do that old trick where they answer every question on your email except for that one. And or they give you a response of, yes, this sounds right, but I have to confirm with so and so. And then, a couple of weeks pass. Next thing you know, it's the show day. You've never gotten a confirmation. Day of show, they're still like, oh yeah, I still haven't talked to this guy, but I guess that's right. And then you get it to settlement, and they say, oh well, actually, I think he told me it's 80, it's this or that. And you say, well, no, this is what I sent you. You never confirm, and then you're standing in a room, calling your promoter rep, or as I try to do is I usually try to have a actual copy of the contract already signed. Occasionally, I get one that isn't signed; it just has the parameters of the deal, which I can show them. But yeah,
Yeah.
but it's one of those things that people they just neglect or think it's always the same. And like Aaron says, some artists can get a sweetheart deal, or some get a certain. Somebody was asking questions about hard and soft goods here in the chat. I've done tours with bands that sell a lot of posters, and generally that's considered soft at the higher rate. But if you sell a lot of posters, a lot of times you can argue that this is actually a hard good / media and should go under the lower rate. And some venues will go for that. Sometimes some agents do that in advance. Sometimes as the road guy, you can just argue it and have it switched on the fly, and make the band a few extra bucks.
Yeah, and you have that latitude to do that. So
yeah, I mean, no one's ever gonna question you getting a better deal for them, and
making more money.
Yeah, and sometimes, and it depends, who you're working for, and this will go. We'll talk later about incentives. Depending on the artists or the managers you're working for and how they treat you and whatnot, you're more inclined to go that extra mile to talk to a venue guy and say, hey, could you put this item under the lower rate? Or sometimes it's like, hey, if they don't care, why should I?
Yeah. Yep. That makes sense. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. No, I'm going to hand it off to Mark for his questions.
Aaron, I'd love to start with you. So we've made it to show day. Let's discuss a little bit about selling merch on show day and kind of the process around that. We're all familiar with the count in, sell, count out. Can you break that down for us and what it's looking like for like kind of a smaller tour and like a van or bus trailer, and then kind of a comparison as we get to kind of a larger tour and just kind of keeping track of inventory?
Okay, so for a smaller tour, if we're in a trailer, let's say, you're going to count in probably an estimation of what you've been doing the last few nights. So let's say I know I sold 10 grand last night. I want to count in at least 15 grand because you always have to count in more than you sold. You have to have more than you sold to sell that much because sizes vary. So I'll start off with counting in maybe 15 grand, and that'll be starting off with what I finished with last night. So my returns are the boxes that I ended the show with, and those automatically go in. And then I'll go through my stock and count out what I think I need to fill based on, I'll take a look at my sheet, which I'll show you a very basic sheet. It's not actually a tour sheet. I just want to start with something basic, but then I'll look through my sheet to see what was left in those returns and add to it. So I'll do a pull, as we call it, and then add that to the returns. And then either I'm counting that in with the venue for me to sell, or I'm checking it in for them to sell. And, versus a larger tour, where you're on a truck or you're going to have a full semi truck, you're going to give them your returns, and then you're going to add in by boxes. You may not even need to break into boxes because it's so much. You can just do your pull by pulling whole boxes versus, dozens of shirts. So I can show you a quick, this is a settlement sheet that I use for like a one-off at like the casino venue that I still manage their merch. And, they generally have Did that come up?
Mm.
No, sorry. I'm not very proficient.
No,
That's a
no, we can see it unless this
Yeah.
is the wrong document.
Let's see.
Yeah, I think we can see it.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Oh,
I'm
I
checking.
can't.
I think we can see it.
Okay.
Oh yeah, there it is. Is that?
I'm not sure why I can't see it.
Oh,
Oh wait, because it's my chat is messing me up. Okay, so let me close that. So okay, now I feel good about this. All right, so this is a very basic one, and I actually put in some numbers to look at. So I just did a tour shirt, let's say, and this is obviously a small act. They don't sell a lot. So we counted in, you know, you can see 12, 24, 24, 24, 12. I wish we could move to metric like the EU, because that would make so much more sense. So if we could just start that movement now and do everything in tens, I wish I would have put tens down. So props to the EU for that. I added dozens because that's what my brain does as an American. And because medium and larges, we are their biggest seller, and we had to add during the show. So I went to go check on the stand when the band was playing, and I knew I needed some more for the out. One of the band members wanted to get a large shirt for their friend, so I pulled that and put it in the comp section. So that will pull it out of my number in the sold. This is our count out. You have your prices, and that's what we sold. And I'm scrolling down. We had a poster. We sold some of those. And then here in our hard section, as we were talking about before in the memo deal, so anything pre-recorded, and sometimes, like we were saying, again, you can negotiate stuff into that section. I generally, anything that's autographed, I feel is pre-recorded. Feel very strongly about that. So if a venue doesn't want to accept that, sometimes I will just not let them sell it, or I will, you know, take it to the next level to fight for it, depending on how the artist feels about it and how much it's worth. So we had the greatest hits, and we sold a few of those because actually CDs don't sell hard anymore these days. Is a very small percentage of what you're selling. So our event is Easy Does It. That was today. And we have a tax rate. I added my credit cards because credit cards are so big these days. It happens to be most of what I sold. This happens to be an artist sells. I have it set up that way. And the sheet would look a little differently if the venue was going to sell. Some of these numbers would be moved around. So we have our credit card fee. And it's 80-20, 20 to the house. And we scroll down here to get our house fee is $779. The tax is the house is keeping the tax. You can see that in this number, and the credit card fee, and or we would keep the credit card fee if we're selling. So the house collected is going to collect $1,200. I have $1,400 in cash. I could pay them. I'd probably, because I need to keep cashes for some expenses, would have advanced to that. I was going to send them a check if it was really close.
Okay.
So that's a basic one sheet. The sheets that I use for a full tour, which keeps inventory better, because it's you can carry everything over to the next show, your cash and your inventory. And I will say this is ingrained in me, is always know your cash and always know your inventory.
Aaron, can you run by us the different types of softwares as well? Is there proprietary software you use or do you just solely use Excel? Because we know that there's at Venue and there's a bunch of new innovative softwares that are starting to come out. Is there any one specific you use, or you prefer Excel?
I prefer Excel personally, and the company I've been working with has been using it, and it's a very similar sheet to the one that they've had since before I was there, and I've been working with them in some respects since like 2006. So it's familiar to a lot of people, and they can read it very easy. It tells a large story. But then there's also some clients that I work for that management needs to have it in an app venue format. So in those cases, I will do 2 settlements a night. I will do it in app venue and in Excel. So I try and look on the bright side of that, as everything is double checked and like it has to be right. So that's like one silver lining to doing it twice. An app venue, I think Angel can speak to the app venue more because he prefers that. So maybe like why you like app venue.
Yeah, like you said, it's a lot of people have their own. Certain merch companies use app venues. Some use spreadsheets that can be pretty rudimentary, or some can have 15, 20 tabs with all sorts of things going on in them. But yeah, app venue for me, especially as it's evolved over the last 5 or 6 years, is I feel it's just very simple, very easy to use, even for like a beginner. It's just kind of common sense. You're not dealing with building formulas on your own and creating weird reports. And also, if if you're lucky enough to have a merch company or an artist that allows you to have high access to the app venue, where you can kind of see inventory, see what's on order, what is sitting in warehouses and whatnot. It kind of, as the road guy, who I feel is a lot of times more in touch with what's actually happening and what you need to be maximizing sales and whatnot, I think it's incredibly useful for me to be able to just look at projections and inventories and kind of advise if needed. If you have an office person that maybe is running 20 tours at a time and might not be paying attention close enough, you can save or make somebody money because you have that access to that. And yeah, I just think App Venue for the most part is a great tool.
I have a quick question, Mark, if you don't mind. I'd like to shoot to Angel before we move into his section. Can you really quick, Angel, just address how comps are handled? We know that we get calls for comps. Who is able to call you for comps? How do you track them, and how do you manage it with your inventory, and how does that affect your end of the night settlement with the venue?
It varies as to who can request them. Some tours are pretty easy. They're like, if somebody on the crew wants a shirt or whoever. Some tours, it's only the tour manager, it's only the artist, only the manager. And it varies as to how these things are accounted for. Some, for me as a road guy, it's a matter of me keeping track of my inventory and what's actually being sold, what I have. So generally what you would do, like an Aaron's sheet, which is kind of the same thing for like App Venue, is you would kind of put an item into the show. Say you're pulling it off your truck rather than from your show inventory. You would put it into your show and then comp it on the sheet, so it eliminates it from inventory. At Venue, most sheets keep track, so at the end of a tour, you can see how many items were comped. Some are more specific, where you have to keep track of who asked for a comp. Sometimes you need an actual signature for something. It really depends, but yeah, basically as a road guy, you're basically just trying to keep an eye on what your inventory is, because if there are some artists who will ask for one, or tours that you'll comp one or two things on a whole tour, and there's some rap tours specifically where they want boxes and boxes of stuff every single day.
Yeah.
So it's an inventory management issue, and somebody here I see asking about how these things are accounted for. It completely varies. A lot of times I don't even have to deal with it. I just put it, as long as it's on the sheet at the end of a tour, that's for the office people to figure out who pays for what.
Right. Who it gets charged back to. Really quick, really quick. Why would you take it from the truck and put it into your show inventory for the evening and then zero it out?
Just because some sheets don't like at venue, sometimes it depends on who set it up and how it's set up. We'll have an option for if you comp something, if you want to comp it from your show or from your truck inventory. Whereas a lot of spreadsheets, you only have a show inventory, and it's just keeping your regular running inventory, say on another sheet. So you want that comp to be accounted for. The only way you can account for it basically is to have it in your show and out of your show. So the item technically may not go into the show. You just pull it out of the truck. You put it on your show sheet. You comp it on your show sheet. It never actually
For
went
tracking purposes.
Yes,
So your inventory and accounting match.
Exactly.
Amazing. Thank you. Over to you, Mark.
Just to put emphasis on that too, before I segue back into show day and selling merch, is that these are conversations. If you want to go back and take a look at our advanced, these are advanced questions I'll ask too, because every management has their own style. Some managers will be like, to the T, these need to be tracked. I don't care, like the numbers have to be accurate. And then I've dealt with management that's like, the artist loves to pull shirts for the fan during the show. Like, just comp it, just tell whoever's running our merch, it's a little more laid back, and there's some flexibility around that too. So just whenever you're going into a tour, just make sure to note that and just be like, if there is comps, and just have that merchandise conversation so there's clarity going into a tour, which will make everyone's life easier, especially a merchandise manager or seller will be with us for the duration of that tour. And segueing back into show day, Angel, what happens if we don't have a merch person? Will you have to hire someone locally? Tell us about that. And just talking about on the local ground of hiring a merch person, and what do you think would be a rate for a local merch person? Just kind of the general discussion around if we're not bringing someone on the road with us. Also touching on occasionally in the deal, you've got a deal where venue sells. So sometimes the venue sells and they have to have the sellers, and sometimes the artist sells. And so our merch person or tour manager has to go and get some sellers. So that's where, this conversation is extremely relevant.
Yeah. So if you have a tour that doesn't have an actual merch person, then you have someone, tour manager, or sometimes it's a merch company rep who will basically trying to find local people, hopefully local merch people that are not on the road or who normally sell merch at shows. And they can find those people from a variety of ways. Some people just have a database, or they know people that live in these towns. Sometimes it's a matter of asking the building person or the venue person if they have a person that they typically deal with. So it varies. And as a road guy, if I'm on a tour where I'm selling and I just need help, it's kind of if it's very busy, it's kind of the same thing. Either
can you hear him? Did we lose audio altogether?
I can hear him.
You hear me?
I can hear.
I can hear Angel. We're loud and clear on my end.
Okay. Then it's maybe Adrian needs to reboot. Then it's me pulling from my mental Rolodex of people that I know, or then asking maybe a building person from an arena. Adrian's having trouble. Look at her.
I've seen that look before.
Yeah.
Get the headphones. Not happening.
Yeah, and then when it's venue sells, luckily, typically, hopefully, they have their own crews, their own people that are experienced. And then speaking back to fair wages, which is a topic you probably shouldn't get me started on usually. But yeah, generally for a person, I like to say, if you're hiring someone to typically just sell, maybe just assist, then I always say $150 to me is what gets you someone who should know what they're doing, that's gonna handle customers and not be a jerk, and also that's not gonna steal from you, et cetera, et cetera. Anything below that, I feel like you're you're kind of diminishing the job itself. And the rates vary on the workload. So
And just to touch a little bit, maybe a little bit further on that, the importance of what could or could not happen, like it's like you get what you pay for, essentially, right? It's kind of
Yes.
like you want that kind of attention, you want someone to be very detail oriented and so on and so forth. Like that goes a long way, and just from my experience as well, 150 is pretty standard norm across the board, at least, and depending on where you go and you're touring to your capacity. But in terms of just hiring a merch person, that's pretty
yeah. If you want someone who's gonna, if you legit have no one on the tour and you bring someone in show by show and you want them to make a display that looks nice, that can account for their money and the inventory before the show, end of the night, and so you're not worried or you're not running into surprises at the next show when what you thought you had inventory wise doesn't match what you have, then yeah, $150 to me is the bottom number for someone that should be able to just handle a easy show for you. Like I said, it kind of the mileage varies. If you have a show which you're doing real, and there's some tours that are doing real business in merch, doing $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 in a club without a merch person on the tour, and they're hiring local. Then if you want somebody to be able to handle that level of sales volume and do it correctly and well, then then we're talking more money, basically.
100%. And before I pass it over to Adrian, we had a little question here. Can you explain what does a VIN fee mean? Percentages and stuff like that.
VIN fee is something that is harder and harder to come by nowadays. But it's something that if you're a merch person on a tour and you are selling every night as part of your salary, there are merch companies and artists that'll pay a VIN fee, which is essentially a percentage of the sales is for the merch person. And generally it's anywhere from 2 to 5% off of generally the adjusted gross after taxes, not before you pay the venue. And it's basically acts as an incentive. In some terms, it's if you say you're on a tour, you're doing clubs and you're doing $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 a night in merch, that from that VIN fee is where you would pay people that you hire to help you. So if your VIN fee is $2,000 off of a show of that size, you're going to be hiring some people and paying them $150, $200, $300, whatever it is. But also if you're on a tour that's maybe not doing that business, but a VIN fee is basically, it's an incentive. And as we talked about yesterday, if you incentivize people to sell more because they make more, I've always found in my experience that they sell more. So I'm a big advocate of the VIN fee because, like I said, it's all about that incentive. And as I used an example yesterday, and I used an example before, if I'm selling merch at a show and it's the show's about to end, and I'm running low on one size of one shirt, or I'm out of wristbands. Maybe it's raining outside. Maybe it's really cold. Do I want to go outside and climb into a truck? If I'm making 5% off what I'm gonna sell, you're damn right I'm gonna get into that truck. Otherwise, I might say, oh, well, I'll just sell more mediums. So that's where the incentive comes in.
That's great, man. I appreciate all that on the show day. And I know that Adrian's going to take it from here and touch on payments and cash management.
So, Aaron, we wanted to just kind of touch a little bit about what kind of, how we obviously we're selling, right? So there's transactions that are happening. How are customers paying? How do you receive that payment? how do you handle cash? How do you handle credit cards? Let's talk about the vending and vendor portion of this.
Okay, so as if I'm vending, then we use a Square shop for our company, and then we log into our particular artist and cash sales. But the trend nowadays, and probably moving forward, is going to be less and less cash. So as much as cash as we can, and it is a goal that you want to take care of the venue that night, but so much these days with transactions going to credit card, we'll have to send a check. So you know, a lot of venues don't want to wait for a check or might be worried about that, so they are going to push that you settle with them that night. I get ahead of it in my advance, especially on a tour where I know my primary sales are going to go through credit card. So I will, you know, be looking to advance where that check's going to go, even before I know for sure I need to do it, so that they are mentally prepared that that's probably going to happen. You want to have your W-9s in order, your banking information. And then a lot of times I'll find that some venues will insist that they have to pay by check too. So, you know, if they're paying you, you know, you'll need to give them your W-9. If you're paying them, you'll need to get their W-9. So it's just being diligent in your advance is the best way you can go about it.
Right. We talked about there being so much less cash these days.
Right. So with the less cash, then we're definitely going to be looking to send a check, or they'll need to send a check. But because we are, you know, as merch people, we deal with a lot of our expenses ourselves. You know, we always want to have cash on us, you know, maybe even for just change at the next venue that we need to vend. So if they can't pay me the whole amount, which, and especially in a very large tour, you know, I don't necessarily want to take 50,000 in cash from them. So I will just take, you know, a partial payment, maybe a couple $1,000s here and there, just to make sure I have enough float to continue, you know, the business I need to do. That's the admin part of the job.
Right. And I want to interject for our participants. It, depending on who sells, is which way the money is flowing, right? Because if the venue is selling, then the venue is going to receive the bulk of the funds and Erin is going to be looking for her money. Conversely, if the artist is selling, then the artist is going to be receiving the cash and or credit card funds and now has to transfer it back to the venue for their portion. So I just want to make it clear that there's, you know, a couple of different ways that cash is flowing in these transactions. Right. And you definitely, and then to the point of that, you know, that everyone is talking about in the chat in terms of who you are hiring. If you are not at the size of tour where you're going to be handling, you know, where you've got somebody great like Erin or Angel or the, you know, plethora of great merch people out there in the world, and you need to hire somebody, you definitely want to hire someone who is able to be so trustworthy. I refer to t-shirts as the $20 bills because they are literally, that's revenue. That's not just some piece of cotton that's hanging out over there in a box. That's a bill. That is a you know, it's legal tender.
It's product.
It's product. So you want to make sure that whoever you've got counting your money, taking care of your stuff, it's very, very, very important. Okay. Talk a little bit about some of the technology that a smaller tour might use to take these payments.
Well, like I said, for our company, we prefer to use Square. They're also throughout venue, they have their own card reader that you can use. So if you're set up on that, you can go through their system. There's a couple more, I think Clover I've seen, but I've never used that. I've seen venues using that. I particularly like Square because it's very easy, user friendly, and you have a tipping option, which has really changed things for us merch sellers in the last, I don't know, 5-10 years, that you can accept tips with your purchase. So as a service, just like the bartender that's maybe, you know, 5 feet away and accepting tips, we now have that option. And that's really changed the game for us as sellers and what we can make. So I think when we can take tips and that is an option, everybody's super excited, you're making more money and you want to sell more. So like each transaction that comes up, you're like, what can I get for you?
Right. And that's sweet. Okay. Thank you, Aaron, for that. Over to you, Mark.
All right, Angel, I want to kick this off and just kind of jump into festivals here. Do you want to break it down? What's the difference between festivals and a normal show day? What the selling is going to be looking like, and just preparing your artists to pick the right merch items depending on where you are and your tier levels and act, and just going into a festival day.
Sure. Yeah. Festivals obviously are not your show. So in general, you are limited as to what you can sell. So if you're on a, let's say if your festival show is in the middle of your tour, you may be on a tour, you have, 10, 15 shirts or whatever, but on a festival show, even if you're, say the top third of the bands headlining this festival, then you're probably going to be limited to 2 to 4 t-shirts and maybe 1 or 2 smaller items. So it's a matter of what I would do obviously is pick my 4 best sellers, and I would put those into the show and let that happen. Again, we discussed yesterday also, if you're doing a festival, that's something like a weekend or a Bonnaroo or a Coachella, what you would generally want to do if you're one of those upper tier artists is that you want your merch to be sold the entirety of the festival, not just on your show day. In which case, you basically arrange that in your advancing, and then also, which makes the job a little easier for the road person, is that you try to arrange to have this merchandise shipped in. If you're coming in the middle of the festival, say on the second day, so that the merch gets there, it's counted in, it's displayed, it's being sold before I get there. And then I basically just need to make sure everything is displayed properly, priced properly, etc. And but if you're a lower level band, you could be limited to 1 item total, 2, and then in which case you're bringing in maybe a box. In general, if you're on a lower level of a festival, it's kind of, we'll see what happens, because you probably won't sell much of anything as the main bands take the money. Event items generally will take a huge portion of the merch sales, as people prefer to have 1 Bonnaroo shirt with every band listed on it. So then it's a matter of putting your stuff in, getting it up on the display. Sometimes it's getting it pulled down in the middle of the show because your band wants to leave 15 minutes after they play. Yeah, it's different. Sometimes it makes it a really difficult day. Sometimes it makes it easier day.
Do you have any tips for dealing with merch at a festival? And if you're doing a lot of festivals, you may want to think about before you get into the product development. You touch on that a little bit, and do festivals, will they have a merch manager and advancing with them in that process?
Yeah, generally there's someone that is in charge who deals with all the merch aspects, sort of the same way as if you would deal with an arena. They have their crew. They're the ones you touch base with in advance. You send them your product lists. You tell them, generally they want to know how much product you're going to give them, what you anticipate you might sell, which they then will say will be much less, and want you to give them much less. So that it varies again. But as far as the product, it kind of depends. A lot of times you're just using your same tour product, that, you know, hopefully you have your tour shirt that includes that festival date on it. Some artists, as we talked before about special things, some artists want to make a special shirt just for Bonnaroo, just for Coachella, which usually I say is a great idea, because that item will generally sell. And if you have somebody who's does well enough in projecting, you can sell and hopefully have very few left of a one festival branded shirt left over. But generally it's, you stick with your tour line and you give them what sells best. Or sometimes you give them what sells worst because you want to get rid of it.
Oh, 100%. Aaron, I wanted to take this over to you. What about small tours playing at festivals, carrying their own merch? Can you touch on that a little bit, and just the advanced process of being with a smaller act that will have their merch with them?
Yes, so you're probably going to be carrying it. You could ship in, maybe you're going to get maybe one, maybe two items, maybe a shirt and a trinket that you can issue to them. If you're really small and you maybe don't have enough, funds to afford to ship in advance, you would just try and get there as early as possible. Ideally, you would still have advance with the festival contact, and they will send you information about what you're allowed and all the parameters involved. And most of these larger festivals are run by very professional groups that have done it for a while, so they're used to dealing with acts of all sizes, and they'll check you in right there, and you can check out whenever you want. You may just give them a heads up, I'm going to be coming over at 8 o'clock because we're going to leave, and then they can pull everything down. You'll do your count out right there. They may have to send a check. If it's a small amount, you may be able to get cash, another thing to ask in your advance. Because again, no matter what size you are, advancing is so important. You should always be talking to every avenue of the tour. And one thing somebody asked in the chat was about price matching, which is really great for this, because even if you're a small band and you normally sell your shirts for $20, $25, you're going to have to price match. And that goes for if you're a support band or you're opening for a larger band. It's always up to, let's say, the festival or the headliner, but they generally don't want you to be selling your shirts for much less. In fact, they want you to, what they say, price match, which if they're selling their shirts for 40, your shirts are going to be 40 as well.
Got it.
Just before Jim takes it off, I wanted to throw the note out there that the importance of just staying on top of those festival advances. It's such a big look, whether you're with the small act or if you're with the big act. Like, management and the artist really care about getting their merch at these festivals. It's such a big look, especially for their fans and for new fans and everyone that's going to be going through those merch stands. Like, they are very serious about that. So the importance of staying on top of those festival advances for merch.
Right. It's such good advertisement for you. And for me, as somebody who's a road rep and going to these festivals, I always go and look at everybody's line and see what's there and what people are doing, if there's different things, and get ideas, or because that small band today is that big band tomorrow. So I really like to keep, my eye on what's happening with everybody.
So let's talk about Canada. Angel, why can't you just take merch across the border into Canada?
Money. It's basically if you're taking goods, this is due to NAFTA, as far as I understand. If you're taking goods across the border from the U.S. Into Canada, there's a lot of paperwork to be done. This is if you're doing this correctly. Obviously, there's paperwork to be done. You need to basically provide everything that you're bringing across the border, the numbers of what you're bringing, where every item was manufactured, which can be sometimes daunting, as I've realized in the past, where you can have 10 shirts made in 6 different countries. So you need to provide where all this is coming from, the costs of the goods, the costs that you're selling it, and basically you need to pay taxes or duty on this bringing it to Canada. So in general, you do not want to do this being the road person, because while even if you do everything correctly and get all the paperwork done, there is always a possibility you can get a border agent who decides he wants to confirm that what you've given him on paper is what is there in reality, meaning that they could decide to take your truck, open it up, and want to count every piece of merchandise. This hasn't happened to me, knock on wood, but I've heard stories of buses and trailers, trucks being held up for hours as somebody decides to sniff around and look at what you have. So generally, you do not take your merch between the US and Canada. You leave it in the US, say at your last US show, and ship it forward to your next US show, and either ship or produce merch in Canada, ship it from the US to Canada to meet you there for your Canadian dates. Or strangely, in a larger scale, if you have an entire semi-truck full of merch, which you don't want to ship that truck or keep that truck in the US, then you do broker it. And this is also kind of going back to at venue and it keeping track of inventory and whatnot. And also, if you keep track, if you're a merch company person that's producing this stuff and you're keeping track of where the items are from, manufactured, etc., sometimes it can be very easy to run a report in App Venue that shows what's sitting in that truck, get it brokered through, and if all goes well, a truck driver rolls up to the border, has a piece of paper with a barcode, they scan it, they see those taxes have been paid, and the truck goes through. But yeah, in general, you don't want to do that. You want to just leave your stuff in the US and have basically separate trucks or separate inventories for both countries.
So Aaron, can you explain to us why we never sneak merch into Canada and do things legally, and what the ramifications are of that?
Well, because you could get in trouble and put your whole career at jeopardy is the short answer. So yeah, it's not worth it. And
there's always like, well, let me just put a couple of boxes in with backline. And then what happens? What are the ramifications?
You don't want to take that chance for sure, because it's not worth it.
What happens though? What are the what happens if you do that and get caught?
Fortunately, I've never been in that position to where I've had to deal with something like that. But you just hear horror stories, like you would be fined or get stuck at the border. You would hold up the tour because the tour could be late for a show, and nobody is going to be your friend after that, for sure. So
yeah, you don't want to give the authorities any reason to block your return to Canada or hold up your tour, dismantle your trucks, and cause a major problem over a couple of boxes of merchandise. It's just not worth it.
It's not worth it to spend thousands of dollars to try to make a few $1,000s, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and possibly ruining your career by doing it. It's never worth it.
Yep. All right, over to you, Miss Shelley.
All right. So I want to start with Angel. So as a tour manager, I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of really great retail teams, and it's something that I feel very passionate about to make sure that they feel supported. So for you as a merch manager, what qualities do you expect from a tour manager, and what do you need from them to help make your job easier?
From a tour manager, I feel one of the reasons I like doing merch is that for the most part, I feel like I can be pretty autonomous. And I like to say that I've been referred to on tours as the ghost, because it's like almost like I'm not there, in that you won't hear from me unless there is some kind of severe issue that I cannot take care of myself. So generally, from a tour manager, I want maybe the information at the beginning of the tour on merch deals. Sometimes I get this stuff from management. Sometimes it comes from a merch company. But if, on a smaller tour, a tour manager, like Jim says, he'll put the numbers in Master Tour, which is very easy. A lot of tour managers I've had, before I even ask or think about the merch deals, I'll just have a spreadsheet show up in my email saying, hey, here are your merch deals for the tour, which is great. And as Aaron was talking about yesterday, another thing in dealing with the tour is that merch people, being somewhat autonomous, tend to do their own travel type things, or we have to pay for our own, generally, our own flights, our own hotels. And before anybody asks, this stuff is then reimbursed to us by a merch company or a tour. But a lot of times the merch business is separate from the rest of the tour business. And so a lot of times it's basically the information from a tour manager of when are we flying in? When is the pre-production day? Please make sure that I'm included on hotel rooming lists and that it is specified that I pay my own. As Aaron said yesterday, it's very common to try, being a merch person, to try to check out of a hotel and try to pay for it, and they insist that it's been taken care of. And I then have to argue with them that I have to pay for it, otherwise it's going to cause more headaches for them and me in the coming days. So basically, me and a tour manager, for the most part, if our contact is limited to ball breaking, as I do with Jim, that's ideal.
Right back at you, brother. Right back at you.
The ball breaking is real. I've seen it.
And Aaron, for you, I know something you had mentioned yesterday was about time and having that communication with management about the time that you need on the out and being the last one out. Can you kind of speak with that a little bit on managing your time, especially with settling the show?
Right. So from the time the show goes down, we like to have at least 2 hours before we have a bus call. Sometimes that can't be the case because it's a tight drive or, whatever the case may be, you're communicating with your production or tour manager in advance about that. So they know that you're last, because when the show goes down, people are still on their way out and they're going to stop and buy merch. And then you still have to count and you still have to settle. And then you want to, hopefully shower or get ready before you get on the bus to go to sleep. From the moment that I get in and start, I'm always thinking of what can I do to be done quickly tonight. So you should always be working through the whole show towards that end result. And because you don't want to hold up the tour, nobody likes that. It's always a goal for me to not be the last person. I think that about answers that.
Going back to what we were talking about with Canada earlier, John Paul had brought up a good point, is that there's also a few other places like Switzerland is someplace also in Europe that you also got to be careful. It's really important that you know which countries you just don't bring stuff across. And we don't know what we're dealing with Brexit. It could be a possibility that we might be having to deal with this going into the UK in the future. So it's really just, as the tour starts, just knowing where and when you have to be aware of taxes and that kind of thing.
Shipping tariffs and things like that.
Tariffs and all that going into a country, and that you just don't bring merch across a border that you need to be aware of, paying taxes and all that stuff on.
Right. We have a couple of, before we wrap, we have a couple of questions that are lingering. We have a question from Dana Carr, who is a wardrobe department head in touring, who has texted me her question because she can't get her technology to work, but she wants to know, fashion designer merchandising collaborations, are those done with the artist team generally, or would that be done directly with the merch company? Aaron, can I direct this to you? And then if Kathy's still on, maybe she can type an answer in the chat.
I'm sorry, I was reading a question and I
That's
totally
okay.
freeze when you were
No,
saying.
that's okay. So if a fashion designer wants to do a merch collaboration for an artist, would that be done with the artist or would that be done with the merch company?
That would probably be done with the merch company via the artist. I mean, it's probably going to go, in our case, through the merch company, and then we'll get approvals by the artist. And it's probably going to be a license. So it may be a design for Hot Topic or Forever 21 or wherever, you know, they are coming from, or a high-end chaser or something. So, you know, that's a whole separate entity of the merch world. You know, that can coincide with touring because you can buy your stock from your licensee and carry it as a line item for that tour. So, and maybe that's what the artist wants. They really like this design and the licensee is willing to produce it at cost for you. And that's part of your deal.
Great, thank you. Okay, fantastic. And then we had another question. Outside of the music industry, do you guys study the apparel or merch verticals in other industries to see what opportunities might be on the horizon and what those numbers look like? Do you guys look around and see what everybody else is doing when what's hot?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. That was about as unequivocal as you get. And the answer is yes, we do. That's pretty cool. Okay, thank you.
With the admin part, I go to the trade shows. There's Magic,
right?
You know, and we're always looking for new licensees. I think that's kind of, and we'll have meetings with all of our current licensees to talk about the new season and like new stuff that maybe our clients want to do. So, you know, we had a client that was really looking for an umbrella product. So we were going around to the different places looking to see who did an umbrella and maybe we could work with them. That's an example.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. Thank you both for an amazing session. Do we have any last minute questions winging in out of left field?
I had a question. If you have any like last minute words of wisdom for our students, is there anything you could say that can come off the top of your head that just kind of leave on a note that makes our students think about merch?
I'll say always know your cash and always know your inventory.
Right. Last minute question from Blue on why the merch person books or pays for their own hotel room. Well, generally on the tours, Blue, that I work on, we keep them as part of the tour. The promoter rep, the merch seller, and the VIP person are generally people who are vendors that are creating revenue for the tour. So to that point, those expenses are part of what that vendor has to account and tabulate, and then those expenses, cost of doing business, comes out of the revenue that the act and that vendor will split. So we try to keep those folks on our hotel lists as a self-pay or a pay-own. And again, it's just a feature of accounting. You know, there are times when an act is the owner of their merch company. That happens. So if the act is the owner of their own merch company and there is not an independent merch company, then you would potentially then keep that, you know, if you're running your own VIP program, if you're running your own merch situation, then that's an employee of the artist. That employee then is, we're covering, you know, but again, it's like, it's just a vendor and accounting issue. And I hope that answers Blue's question. And good morning.
Angel, do you have any words of wisdom? Any last minute words for our students?
I see somebody's comment here about having gotten a shed tour and having not done anything bigger than a club before that, and somebody suggested they shadow someone at a shed show. I get asked a lot from people who are on a small tour or maybe haven't toured, and they part of it is that they think, oh, I can do, or maybe I can handle merch on a shed tour and an arena tour the same as I do on a club. my advice is always you want to do the same thing. You want to talk to someone, shadow someone if possible, doing those kind of tours. I mean, and this can also apply to the beginning level of a club tour. Is like I said, my first tour, I was basically jumping behind the merch table to help when it was busy, and I just kind of watched how the gig was done, how you count in, count out, settle, etc. And that's the best way to learn and the best way to kind of get a feel for how things work, because it is vastly different.
Amazing.
Thanks,
All
everybody.
right. I think that wraps us up for today. Thank you to our co-hosts, and thank you to all of you who have joined us. We will be back Thursday as per usual, and we're going to do some case studies for you guys. We're gonna have you guys help us out of a couple of actual road jams. Problem solving and critical thinking is happening on Thursday.
Case studies on Thursday. Everyone have a great week. Thank you, Angel. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Shelly, for joining us again. And keep an eye out on our socials for updates, but we'll see you again on Thursday, same time.
Wave out, the Zoom wave out.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Y'all, big love.